Hi everyone, my name is Vanessa. I'm an alcoholic and my sobriety date's October 8th, 2017. What happens is that I am actually recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body, as a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous promises that we can be. And it's really important because for a long time, just like a decade of my life, I am 38 by the way, for a decade of my life, I was completely hopeless and powerless over alcohol and other substances. I did get sober clearly through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So if you're interested in that way of recovery, this is a channel for you. I'm very big on not necessarily, I think I'm a huge proponent for the tools that AA taught me, which is how to exist in this world, on this planet, with the circumstances, with the way that life gets lifey. And it gives me a really predictable way to achieve a spiritual awakening that I need in order to stay recovered. Whenever, I think that one of the most dangerous states of minds to be in is to feel overcome by hopelessness. I know that, and I was just telling somebody this the other day, like I know that when my drinking was really bad, I would wake up and not knowing what the hell happened the night before, but knowing I was going to regret whatever I woke up to that day. And I remember I was renting a room and I would wake up and my entire floor would be covered in bottles, the little mini boxes of wine, because I was a really classy drunk. Just disgusting disgust all over the floor, all over my bed. I was renting a room from like a nice little family and I was always embarrassed that I was going to be found out. Of course, vomit was always involved. And I remember just being so ashamed, just kind of so shrouded in shame, and just like the weight of it actually was so unbearable a lot of the times. And something that I so distinctly remember feeling is just really resentful that I was still alive. I felt extremely resentful that I just wanted my heart to stop. Like in some subconscious, unconscious way, I was trying to kill myself in this very slow and suffering way by drinking myself to death. And it wasn't working. I kept waking up every morning and I was just left with the hangover and the decision to try to find more money, try to get money somehow so that I could start the whole cycle over again, and hopefully next time I wouldn't wake up. I know people tend to be like, oh, but you weren't like a heroin addict. Oh, you weren't like a meth addict. Oh, you weren't doing any of that stuff. Like you weren't pills. And it's like, no, I just got really addicted to the substance that you can wake up at 6 in the morning and go to your local liquor store and easily get without any question. You know, it's just, I can go and consume it until 2 in the morning at some, wherever, some dive bar that I'd eventually get kicked out of. It's just, alcohol is its special type, and trust me, all addictions are terrible. Even like food addiction, sex addiction, gambling, shopping, all addictions are terrible when you hit this sense of hopelessness. And I just remember being so resentful at my body because it just kept wanting to live. And it was just like I could drown myself in booze as much as I wanted to, but it did not give me the escape that I wanted to. For several years, I was, people look at how I was living at that time and they're like, I remember my dad would always be like, don't you have any common sense? You're a very smart girl. Why can't you just get your shit together? And it's just like, oh, it goes beyond that. I would like to say that I think I knew what I needed to do in order to get sober without AA, but clearly I didn't. And even if I did, I clearly didn't want to. all I wanted to do was make the suffering stop somehow, and I couldn't get out of this like continuous like chaos loop that I was like stuck in. And until I finally gotten stuck, right? But even before that, I feel like I don't really talk about my before it got bad enough. So I kind of want to get into that a little bit more. So I grew up in Southern California to a pretty normal family, I guess, meaning that my parents are not alcoholics. My sister, I have an older sister, she's not an alcoholic. We had, you know, some stuff go on while we were growing up that I know absolutely changed the brain chemistry for me. There were like a handful of traumatic events that happened to me that I can see now, like, programmed me for how I was to basically handle any other stressors that came in my life. I was in school, like a straight A student, teacher's pet, always, high achiever, always in the, you know, AP or advanced placement classes. And I was just always overperforming, and also school just kind of came easily to me. I loved reading. I always had a lot of friends. I think the only awkward, like super awkward, like I didn't like phase that I went through was like in 7th grade. I kind of had like, it was weird because I wouldn't necessarily get bullied by girls, but like there was this guy who had a crush on me, and then like I kind of led him on and was like, LOL, never mind. And then he got some girls to come kick my ass, but then she was just like, you want me to kick her ass? And I was like, hey, I'm here. And yeah, nothing happened because I just wasn't, I don't know, I didn't get in a lot of trouble as a girl. I was very much like a rule follower, or I would push the rules like to the limit as much as I could in order to get away with stuff. But overall, I just always wanted to be seen and perceived as good, and I always enjoyed the benefits that came with that, which typically was like, oh, especially in school, you know, we're socialized so much. It's like, you know, whatever benefits come with that. And so I was always really well liked. I also was really, you know, so I would go to school, overperform, and then at home would be a little bit more tumultuous. I was extremely rebellious with my parents. I scream at them. I just hated so many of like these weird and dumb arbitrary rules that they had. But it's not that they even had that many rules. It was just I didn't understand why things mattered, I guess. And I also didn't appreciate the hypocrisy of them either. It was just, I didn't really like that they would tell me that I had to be honest and kind, and then I would see them, because my parents would fight all the time, saying the most like horrendous and abusive things to each other, and then like escalating fights of nothing into huge fights that were very scary for little girl me, you know. And I'm like, oh, these are the people I count on to like provide for me and keep me safe, and they can't even keep each other safe. It was really terrifying. We moved around a lot. My dad wasn't super good with money. He still isn't, like, to this day, and maybe I'll do a whole other video about how certain cycles never end. And that's no judgment on him. You know, he did the best that he can with what he could. There just isn't any like willingness to want to learn to do things differently. And I feel like my parents are very much the same in that way, that they got stuck to an idea and they refused to grow from it, even when it became inconvenient. They would rather live in this delusion that things can be a certain way, rather than accepting the circumstances as they are and just being like, okay, maybe it's time that I just grow or like let go of that. And you know, it's not everyone's journey, and I've had to learn to not be judgmental of it, so that I can live free of resentment, because I understand that because I chose this way of life, which is, spiritual growth and like personal development and like self-improvement, and really wanting to see how I could be of help to other people. That not everybody, has those same desires, and it doesn't mean that any one thing is better or worse than the other. It just means that we're just on different paths. And unfortunately, a lot, and who's to say that if they were that way, that I would be this way now. I feel like a lot of how I grew up was my parents being really afraid of the world, and they kind of like suffocated my sister and I to also be really afraid of the world. And like, you can't trust people, don't trust anything, always trust like the government and big institutions. And it's like, and it's like, you got to follow all the rules, and you got to do this. It's just like, don't ever draw any attention to yourself. Make sure that you don't talk to strangers. Like, the world is a very bad place, and no one is going to watch out for you the way your family will. And it's like, the way my family will. My family doesn't even care about my feelings, and I remember like really distinctly trying to bring up some of the more traumatic issues that came up, and I was try to seek like comfort from my parents, and it just wasn't there. They were not capable of holding that space for me. And it's not because it's not because they didn't love me, because I can say with like 100% certainty that they love me. Like, they love me so much. And at the same time, it was really sad. This really sad, I don't know, like there's this attachment that they created to their children, and possibly to each other as well. This idea of what a family is, that is like, anytime that I tried to create and step out in my own independence and my own identity and my own interests, that was anything different than what they had kind of like, raised me to be or to do or whatever, it was like a threat to them. It was like immediately like, well, why would you do that? What are you thinking? Who's putting these ideas in your head? And it's just like, these are just things that I actually like. I remember even like getting involved in my church down here, and I was really excited to be part of this huge Easter production that we're doing, because it's kind of like a larger church, and they serve like a big part of the community where I live. And I was really excited and proud to be part of this. And I was like, I really hope that you guys can come down and see like the hard work that we've put into this. And they were like, why would you even get involved in that? And it was just like such a weird thing to like criticize me for. And it was just like, okay. And even more recently, I'm involved in another organization, another Christian organization, which does a lot of social justice work. And I got involved with it because one of the founders is one of my favorite authors. One of his books completely changed the way that I approach my faith and Christianity, and it kind of healed a lot of things for me. And so I was able to get involved with this organization. Now he's my boss, and it was like such a blessing. It was like everything that I wanted in my recovery, to be involved with this organization. And when I got to finally meet him and the rest of the staff in person, it was like a big deal, because I was going to like travel across the country, and like I had been hyping this up for months, to my family, to my friends. I was just so excited about it, because I was finally get to be with these people in the same place and get to talk about things that are important to me. And I was going to travel cross country on a road trip to get to this event. And before that, I told my parents, you know what, before I travel across the country for this event, why don't we travel and road trip together? And that way I can kind of get my feet wet on like longer distance road trips. And if anything happens, I have my parents nearby, but also, it'll be a cool way for like us to bond and have like this experience, right? And so we went on this road trip, and it was a good time. And then I came back, and I had planned it so that I had a couple weeks between. And then as I got ready for the next one, they were like, where are you going? who are you going with? Like, it was all of a sudden I was doing something bad. Like, I was a bad person for like going on this other road trip on my own. And they're just like, you've never told us about this. And it was just like, I felt so like, and that was just like the epitome, and actually the final straw of why I haven't talked to them. And again, no hard feelings. I just feel like there isn't any room in my life right now for people who don't respect my decisions, or for people who repeatedly try to gaslight me out of my own interests or my own purpose or my own mission here on earth. And more than anything, it's just a complete lack of actual care. Because it just kind of showed me that they don't see me. They only kind of see me as like this accessory, as like a daughter to this idea of what they think like the parent and like family unit is, right? Even though I'm like almost 40, and they're like clearly want to still hold me in this little girl daughter role. And so it just was like really heartbreaking for me to see that like my parents are not actually interested in me as a person, as an adult who has her own independence and like anything like that. And that was my entire childhood. I was just not being validated, not being seen, not being valued as my own individual person. And so when I felt really stuck growing up and, you know, in my teens and in my 20s, kind of trying to understand like who I was, but feeling this deep loyalty to my family all the time, you know, like even with all the chaos and stuff that happens and some more traumatic stuff that I don't really feel is appropriate to talk about here, you know, it may be I'll be able to talk about it in the future. It's not that it's anything that I'm ashamed of. I just want to like also protect their privacy, and not just be putting like all our business out there. But you know, once I kind of realized that like, oh, okay, I'm wanting, especially in my teens, right? Like, I think it's a very normal thing to want to start to develop your own personality and your own interests apart from your family. Like, that's why there's always conflict between teenagers and their parents. Like, that's when you really begin to kind of test drive being your own person. And I just kept getting hit with like, not like physically hit, but like, I kept having this resistance, and this resistance again was not like physical. They were not like threatening. They were not like, it was just this like more like nefarious, like this more like toxic seeping in of like trying to control how I thought about myself, how I felt about myself. There was never, I didn't get a ton of encouragement. I didn't get a ton of validation. I didn't get a ton of support in a lot of ways. In any meaningful way that would require any kind of genuine sacrifice on their part, you know. For my parents, if I was like, I always was very much into art, into like painting and drawing, and so as little effort that they had to do to support me in that, they would support me. So it's like monetarily, if I needed the supplies, my dad would take me to, you know, the art supply store and spend $100 on my supplies. If I needed this or that, like they would pay for it. But there was never actually like, what else can we do to like type of thing, right? I just need to continue to emphasize that my mom and dad did the absolute best that they could. Their parents were never like, that would be laughable to think that my parents would ever get that support from their grandparents, because they were busy. They had like 8 or 9 kids each. You know, my parents were not getting the attention that they needed either. So clearly they were just repeating patterns, and it's fine. But I'm saying all of that, I'm using all of that as more background so that you understand kind of down the line where this separation, where I really believe that my reliance and dependence on alcoholism came in. Because as I started to experiment in my teens, and then I got involved in a relationship with somebody who ended up doing meth, and this was my first love. In retrospect, I mean, I still have a lot of love for the guy, and he's doing extremely well. He's doing very well, and he is sober. But you know, I kind of got involved with this group of guys who were all on drugs, and I was like the people pleaser wanting to be liked. And so I I would really just kind of like, oh, if you guys need money, you need rides, you need this, you need that. I was trying to be like the mom to them, and like kind of, because I felt like they were, you know, they needed my help in somehow. And even though I couldn't really help them, I thought I was basically just enabling them, really. And more, I kind of started to like feel this like separation, this internal separation of myself from who I wanted to be and who I was. And more, like as the years went on, the separation grew larger and larger, and I just began to fill it with alcohol and like men and drugs and shopping and the chasing of the money and the material things and all this other stuff that like clearly were not going to save my life or give me any sense of purpose or actual fulfillment. And I feel like in looking back at my life now, like I can really clearly feel and see and sense that that is why it's so important that when we get into recovery, that as I continue to be in my recovery and to stay recovered, that I continue to integrate all parts of myself into my decisions, into what I'm doing. Because what happened during those teens and those 20s is I got so separated from myself, and it's like, you know, I was always more like of an optimistic person. I just wanted to have fun, you know, I just wanted to enjoy life. I just wanted to like experience people and new places and like, try new things. Like I've just naturally been that type of person, but because I was so kind of like sheltered and like told to be afraid of everything and everyone, and that everything that everyone else was doing was wrong, I really questioned of like, I also was wrong because I wanted these things. And then also you factor in things like the standards that society has, like, oh, I should be in a relationship, I should be getting married, I should be wanting children, I should be wanting to buy a house, I should be wanting the newest luxury car, I should want to be 100 pounds, I should want to have, you know, all this stuff. And it's like, but like those things never resonated with me, you know, and it's not a bad thing if you want those things. I just knew, I just knew from a very young age that those things that society pushes were not going to bring me the happiness I wanted, because I wanted to do this other stuff, you know, and it seemed like there was always a conflict there. And because I was so afraid of being bad or not being the good girl, that I had gotten so much like, that I had really reaped the benefits of, you know, in school, that in like just growing up, I was really afraid that if I didn't continue to do that, that I would lose the approval of people, that I would lose love, that I wouldn't be worthy, that, you know, it was worse to be alone and do my own thing than to do what everyone else wanted me to do so that I could keep everybody else in my life, but then just hate myself, you know? And so when I got into my 20s, that got more and more difficult to reconcile. And, you know, I've just like art and writing and music have always been things that have been interesting to me. I love philosophy. I love reading about different, like, I don't know, just like theology and like God, like these things have always been really, like I need things with some substance and some weight in this world, you know, because when I look out, when I watch commercials, when I flip through a magazine, like all of these things are just so artificial. Like I always needed something a little bit more substantial than what society has told me that I should be consumed with. And it's just, you know, it just never really rang true to me. And so because I couldn't reconcile this difference between what I internally wanted and what the external world told me that I should want, I just began to fill in with other things. So like the drinking was just a really good way to numb myself out, to disconnect from myself, to disconnect from that and from all of the pain that I was told. Really, my parents would be like, oh, that was nothing, like don't, just forget about all the traumatic stuff that I had gone through, the bigger life events that really changed my chemistry, my brain chemistry, that basically got me used to these feelings of like being highly anxious. Like there came a point where I couldn't even like stand in grocery stores because I was so anxious all the time. and so depressed where I just wouldn't even get out of bed for a week. I would go through these cycles then, and then also and try to tell people I think it's because I'm sad because of these unreconciled things in my past, and people are like, oh, just get over it, it was in the past, just always being really dismissed. And because that stuff doesn't go away, and I kept getting dismissed, I got myself into therapy in my 20s. And that was when I started getting diagnosed with mood disorders. And, at this time is also when I started getting hospitalized in psychiatric hospitals, and when I started getting put on anti-psych or on psych meds and mood stabilizers, and all while also mixing in the alcohol and also getting involved in bad relationships, and also just like, always thinking that the grass would be greener somewhere else. And so I was changing jobs a lot. I was changing relationships a lot, drinking a lot, and moving a lot. I would move a lot. And so during all that time, still trying to like escape this sense that like something was wrong, and I haven't ever been able to talk about it. And anytime I have tried to talk about it, the people who are supposed to care for me tell me that it's nothing and I'm making a big deal about it, and I need to just like shut up and be a good girl and just do what I need to do, and move on. And it's like, okay. And so then I'd go into therapy, and because I also started to like self-harm as well. I still have a lot of scars on my body from self-harming, and it got to be a lot. And I would go to therapy, and I was so disconnected from myself that I couldn't even tell a therapist what the problem was. I couldn't even tell a psychiatrist what the problem was. I couldn't even explain. All I could say was like, me sad, me cry a lot, me not feel like living on earth. And it was just like, okay, you're spending a lot of money to be sitting in this office talking about nothing. And I mean, I remember one specific therapist appointment where I was just like crying the entire session. And it was because it was the first time somebody asked me, so like, what's wrong? Like nobody had asked me. And I was just like, where do I even begin by that point? And and that's also like right around the time when I started getting my DUIs. I got my first DUI in my early 20s. I don't even remember now. I guess I was like 22, and then I got it like at 23 as I got my first 2 DUIs. And then I had the additional shame on top of that, And again, my parents were like, at that time, and I'm not blaming all of this on my parents. I'm just saying these are the people who like I kind of, just as an example of how I tried to manage this. It was like, clearly they're seeing their daughter struggling, but the problem must be with her friends. The problem must be with her job. The problem must be with whatever book she's reading. It can't be because our daughter is just actually sad because of things that she has experienced growing up, which we were there to witness and not comfort her for, right? And they would pay like my fines. They would take me to the DUI classes. They would like kind of enable this in a different way. And so I never really actually had to like suffer the consequences of that specific, like they would still buy me cars so that I could drive even though I wasn't licensed. And I, without ever asking like, hey, are you okay? Is everything fine? Like, do you need help? I got myself into therapy, and because I didn't have the words, because I was so non-practice in trying to like deep dive into myself to figure out what actually was wrong. I mean, a lot of those therapy appointments were kind of pointless. And that's kind of why I don't even recommend therapy unless you can really get honest with yourself and you're willing to, or you're willing to want to work on getting honest with yourself so that you can really get to the point of like why you're there. And so that continued until it continued, and I got involved in more, toxic relationships, which eventually ended up with me getting that, getting into a drinking problem that was an everyday thing. because now I had lived, 25 years of like being told that I couldn't, or actually by the time I got my third DUI, I was 29. I had lived 29 years of like only being praised for being good and quiet, and really shamed and dismissed for all of the bad. And even when I was struggling, just being told like, just get over it. And everything kind of hit the fan when I moved away from my family and moved to San Diego to be with this guy. And we were in a relationship for, how long were we in? We were in a relationship for 3 years, I guess. And it was an extremely codependent relationship where he was on drugs and I was drinking, but I didn't know I was an alcoholic yet at that point. And if he did know that, he didn't tell me. And getting into even worse situations just over and over again. And sorry, I'm trying to understand like where I want to go from here, because I feel like this part of my life is really covered in all the other videos. If you haven't seen the other videos, just maybe go through and watch some of those. And I know some of you have been watching since the very beginning, and so I also don't want to be like just telling a story freaking again. So by the time I got into that last relationship, before I got sober, I was again just really disconnected from self. I had no real sense of self, and so my identity became that relationship, all the good, bad, and the ugly of it. And even though my internal world was extremely like confusing and painful and unstable, I still maintained having like a job for the majority of that, and having a place to live. More towards the end, when I started like having issues with like roommates because of my drinking and my mental health, and I was like screaming on the phone and kind of all of that, that's kind of more when I was starting to live in like motels, or in my car, like that kind of stuff really, that's kind of when it started getting a little bit sketchier. And I began to realize that like, I'm just gonna die this way. Like, I was just like, this is just how I'm going to die. Like all of those dreams that I had, all that creativity, all that sense of like exploration and optimism that I had, just was drowned at that point. It was just drowned in my depression, in my anxiety, in my crazy delusions that I didn't have a problem, that my drinking was normal, that I could control my drinking, that everyone else was just expecting too much of me, or nobody expected enough of me, or like this, all that life could be was just this horrible rat race that was just gonna be on a hamster wheel for the rest of my life, and that life had no real meaning. And I became super hopeless. Like there was no hope, which is really, kind of devastating to think about, because that isn't like my natural state of like, I am annoying, you guys. Like if you think I'm annoying in these videos, I am annoying in real life, because I really do want to see like the good side and the bright side of things. And it was gone. Like any glimmer of hope was gone for me at that point. And then I got my third DUI and I went to jail, and I got sober, and then I relapsed, and then I got scared. But then that's when I got introduced into the 12-step program, and I think that maybe I'll do a part 2 to this, talks more about my actual recovery. But that's just kind of a quick glimpse as far as what's and who I am, and how, I guess, just like the foundation for like where the majority of the stuff that I talk about, where it comes from. I think it's usually helpful to just have a little bit more background. And that's all I have for right now. I do kind of want to start posting more helpful videos for people. I really appreciate the comments that you guys all leave for me. I just love hearing from people who are evaluating their relationship with alcohol, who've had a DUI, who are sober. Like, you guys, I don't know, like, none of us is in this alone, right? We're all in this together, actually. And you don't ever have to feel alone, just knowing that there's a community of people out there who want to see other people do well and get separated from all these delusions and false beliefs that we have about ourselves, so that we can find true freedom from everything, including alcohol. Like, alcohol just seems like a literal just like drop in the bucket of an ocean of possibilities that we can just like let go of, but we don't have to continue repeating these toxic thinking behaviors, these toxic relationships, these toxic defense mechanisms or coping mechanisms. That there are a multitude of ways that we can be living our lives, and it doesn't have to be hopeless. So that's all I have right now. I will post another video with a part 2, and I'm just kind of trying to get more into the rhythm of posting in general. And I got a new camera, actually, so you don't have to see a blurry Zoom face. So also, people kept telling me that I look younger in these recent videos than I do in my older videos. And I'm like, it has to just be because of Zoom, because it just, I don't know, whatever. Okay, I love you. Okay, bye.